Smelled like her. The same lavender she'd used for as long as I could remember. The fabric soft, in the specific way that expensive bedding becomes after many washings. I had stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing most of the permanent things in your life, and then you notice again, in the wrong moment. I was awake because I couldn't sleep. This happened to me occasionally. Not insomnia, nothing as dramatic as that. Just an awareness at 2 in the morning that my mind was still running a quiet process I couldn't shut down. I lay still in the dark and listened to the house settle around me. Isolde had her back to me. The clock on the nightstand read 2:14 a.m. The only sound was the low refrigerator hum 2 floors down. Then she shifted in her sleep, a small exhale, a repositioning of her shoulder, and said a name. It wasn't quite said. It was softer than that. Somewhere between a sigh and a syllable, the way a word becomes when the mechanism of sleep relaxes all the usual controls. But I heard it. I had good ears. I had always had particularly good ears. Conrad. She said it the way you say the name of something you've been missing without admitting you miss it. I did not move. I kept my breathing exactly even. I stared at the ceiling and felt the sound settle into me the way cold water settles into dry soil, slow and complete and permanent. I did not wake her. I did not ask. I lay there for a long time, cataloging. Conrad. Not a common name. Not a name she had ever mentioned to me, not at a dinner party, not in a story about work, not in the casual shorthand of married people who share the texture of each other's days. But I ran through the last 6 months of her conversation. The names she'd dropped while cooking, while on the phone in the kitchen, while describing someone at work who had annoyed her or impressed her. I ran through them carefully and came up with nothing, which meant Conrad was someone she did not talk about. That was interesting. That was, in fact, the most interesting thing that had happened in this marriage in quite some time. I got up at 3 a.m. I did not turn on a light. I moved through the dark bedroom with the practiced ease of a man who knows the furniture by memory, went downstairs to the kitchen, and filled a glass of water. I sat at the table in the dark. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that, because it matters for what comes later. What I felt was closer to the sensation I remembered from childhood. Finding a loose board in a hallway I'd walked down every day for years, the slow recognition that the thing I had been walking on for so long was not quite as solid as I had assumed. It was not panic. It was closer to a kind of recalibration. The mind updating its model of the world to account for new information. I drank the water. I went back to bed. I did not sleep. In the morning, Isolde made coffee the way she always did. Too strong, poured into the large blue ceramic mug she'd had since before I knew her. She was in a good mood. She hummed something low and tuneless, stood at the window with her coffee, and looked out at the garden the way she did in the mornings. She wasn't in a hurry. And she didn't notice that I was watching her with more attention than I had used in a while. I ate my toast. I asked if she'd slept well. She said yes, actually. Really well. She smiled, and the smile looked genuine, which told me she had no memory of what had come out of her in the night. She didn't know. That was the first data point. She didn't know she'd said it. I drove to work at Thornfield, the consultancy I'd built over 11 years in an office building that always smelled, on Monday mornings, like coffee someone else had brewed, and the particular cologne of a man on the second floor I'd never liked. I parked in my usual space, sat in the car for 3 minutes before going inside, and then got through a 9 o'clock client call and a 2 o'clock internal review without thinking about the name once. Because the ability to work inside a clean operational register, regardless of what is happening underneath, is something I had spent 20 years developing. I thought about it on the drive home, deliberately, with the same methodical attention I'd have given a business problem I needed to solve. Isolde was a marketing director at Aldercroft Capital, a mid-size investment firm in the financial district. She had worked there for 6 years. I had met maybe 8 of her colleagues across work events, quarterly dinners, the Christmas party, the annual conference she attended out of state every spring. I knew those 8 names. Conrad was not among them. The second data point was older than the name, and had been sitting in a drawer at the back of my mind for months, unlabeled and unexamined. She had started taking her phone into the bathroom at night. Not once, not occasionally, routinely, and without comment. It was the kind of behavioral shift that is invisible until you have a reason to look for it, and then it is suddenly entirely legible. I noted it. Third, 4 months ago she had started going to the gym on Saturday mornings. I had not asked questions. I'd been glad she'd found something for herself, assumed it was a response to the particular flatness that our shared routine had acquired. She came back fresh-faced and slightly flushed, and talked about machines she was using and improvements she was making to her form. I had nodded and been supportive, and had not once thought to ask which gym or who she went with, or why she had quietly switched from the branch 2 streets from our house to one 20 minutes away in traffic. I filed that next to the first 2. I did not say anything that evening. I made dinner. Wednesday was mine, and we ate with the television on, the background noise of a property show we had both stopped actually watching months ago. I observed her phone on the table beside her plate. Face down, which had been her habit for a while. I had normalized it. I stopped normalizing it. After she went to bed, I sat in my study, opened my laptop, and created a new document. I typed the date at the top. Beneath it, I wrote 3 lines. Just facts. The name, the phone behavior, the gym. No editorializing, no emotional language. Strictly what I had observed, and when. So I saved the document under a file name that meant nothing, a string of numbers that looked like a version date, nested inside a folder of similarly meaningless files on an encrypted partition of my hard drive that I had set up 2 years earlier for client work. I wasn't permitted to discuss outside the firm. I had started my file. The weeks that followed had a particular texture. On the surface, nothing had changed. The house, the meals, the evenings, the way she sat on the couch with her knees tucked under her when she was cold. I went to work, came home, was present in all the ways I had been present before. I did not ask new questions, I did not change my behavior, but underneath, I was paying a different kind of attention. The observations accumulated. She bought a new dress and did not mention it. She was wearing it to a work event, and returning that evening with the particular ease of someone who had been looked at in a way they found pleasing. She started receiving package deliveries addressed only to her name. Small things, cosmetics, a book, which wasn't unusual in itself, but each of them came with that same slight excess of care in putting them away before I could see. She laughed at her phone one evening, while I was in the same room, and when I glanced over she tilted the screen without drama and said it was something a friend had sent, and then laughed once more, as though the friend's name being unremarkable was reason enough not to mention it. The friend was not named. In my file, each entry was dated, specific, and entirely free of interpretation. I was not building a case for a confrontation. I was building a record. Whilst there is a difference, and the difference matters in practical ways that I was beginning to understand in considerable detail, I identified Conrad on a Tuesday in early March. It came through the shared family laptop, the one we used for household budgeting and streaming subscriptions. I sat down to check the joint account balance. The browser had a tab open that she had not closed. Isolde's Aldercroft calendar, logged in through the web interface, was sitting there in the middle of a week view. I did not open it further. I did not dig. I looked at what was already visible on the screen. A recurring event on Tuesday afternoons, flagged as a location meeting. Quarterly alignment. See Ralston. The next instance was that afternoon, at 4, us at a cafe I had once suggested for a client lunch, and she had dismissed as too loud for a real conversation. Conrad Ralston. I had a last name. I had a location and a recurring time. I closed the laptop without touching anything else. I typed the name into a clean browser on private mode. LinkedIn returned him in the first result. Aldercroft Capital, Senior Investment Director. The photograph showed a man in his early 40s, the kind of even-featured, square-shouldered competence that reads as successful from across a room. His profile indicated he had been at Aldercroft for 4 years. Isolde had been there for 6. 2 years they had overlapped before the recurring Tuesday meetings began. 4 years total since he'd joined. Whatever this was, it had had time to develop and deepen, with access built in, as the natural currency of a shared workplace providing cover for everything that had been accumulating. I sat with the number for a moment. 4 years. Then I closed the window, cleared the browser history, and went back to work. I called Gideon the next morning from my car, parked on a side street I didn't normally use. Gideon was a property and family law solicitor who had been one of my closest friends since a first job we'd both taken straight out of university. We had stayed in contact through the years, in the way that people do when the early friendship was the kind that forms before anyone is trying to be anyone, before the performance of the professional self has had a chance to take hold. I told him I needed 15 minutes. Off the record, as a friend first, before anything else. He asked if everything was all right. I said, "No, Martin, but I'm handling it carefully, which is why I'm calling you before I've done anything." He was quiet while I gave him the relevant facts. Not everything. I hadn't assembled everything yet, but enough. When I finished, he was quiet for another moment. "How much of the marital estate is liquid versus tied up in the house and the business?" he asked. I told him. "Your holding company predates the marriage?" "Yes." "She's never had a formal role in Thornfield, no directorship, no documented equity stake, no contribution recorded in any company filing?" That was correct. "Then the business is almost certainly protected," he said. "The asset that's going to be contested is the house, especially if the down payment split isn't formally documented anywhere meaningful." I asked him what he would do in my position, and he said, "Talk to a financial advisor before you talk to a divorce lawyer. And I mean a different financial advisor from whoever you're using jointly, because if they have any relationship with her, you're not going to get a candid picture. Get the full financial landscape clear before you make any moves. Some things are dramatically easier to arrange before formal proceedings begin than during them." I thanked him. I told him I would be in touch. I drove to work with a clearer sense of direction than I'd had since the night I'd lain still and listened to her say a name in the dark. The financial advisor I chose was Elena, and she had been referred by a Thornfield client, a partner at a mid-size private equity firm who had used her for his own restructuring a few years back, and described her with the specific quality of praise that experienced people give to someone who had protected something for them. Her office was on the western edge of the city. well away from the financial district, well away from Aldercroft, well away from any institution where Isolde had a relationship. I made the appointment in my name only, on a Tuesday when Isolde had the recurring meeting with Conrad Ralston. Elena had the compressed efficiency of someone who had been in this profession long enough to encounter most human situations without being moved by them. She didn't ask about the marriage. She asked about the assets. I appreciated the distinction. We spent nearly 2 hours together. I had brought documentation, the Thornfield Holdings structure, the founding date, the personal investment accounts, the joint account records, the mortgage instrument, and the property deed. She went through everything without rushing. Her assessment, delivered at the end, was careful and direct. Thornfield Holdings and everything beneath it was ring-fenced. It predated the marriage. Isolde had no formal stake in it, and there was no documented argument that her income or domestic contribution had materially funded its development. The personal investment accounts in my sole name were mine, though they would need to be declared in any proceedings. The joint accounts were shared, and any significant withdrawals from them before proceedings began would be scrutinized and could be characterized as dissipation. The house was the most complicated variable. "The down payment," she said. "You said you contributed roughly 2/3 of it." "From a Thornfield business account," I said. "The transfer is on record." She wrote a note. "That's important. The paper trail exists, which is more than most people have. It's not a guarantee of a 2/3 allocation in a settlement, but it substantially strengthens the argument for unequal contribution." Then she asked the question I hadn't anticipated. "Have you looked at her financial behavior recently? Not as a surveillance exercise, as a data exercise. Do you have a clear picture of what she earns, what she spends, where it's going?" I said I had a general sense, but hadn't looked at the detail. She said, "I'd look. Not because I'm assuming anything, but in situations like the one you're describing, it's not uncommon for one party to begin moving money before the other has any indication that the relationship is changing. The joint account is accessible to you. The statements are your right to review. I would review 3 months at minimum." I drove home that evening and pulled 3 months of joint account statements from the online portal. The joint account was legally mine to review and always had been. What I was looking for was not what was there: the regular bills, the grocery runs, the streaming subscriptions, but what was new. Pattern change. Something that had appeared and had not been mentioned. I found it in month 2. A new recurring outgoing payment, $460 monthly, to a recipient listed by account number rather than a merchant name. Most automated payments show a trading name, a registered business, something human-readable. This one was opaque, just the number, just the amount, repeating for 11 weeks. 11 weeks ago was approximately the period when I had first noticed her carrying her phone to the bathroom at night. The timing was not coincidental. I did not need it to be coincidental. I photographed the statement with my phone, added it to the encrypted file. What I want to explain about the process of building that file over those weeks is what it was doing to me in ways beyond the practical. I had been, since the night I heard the name, in a state of sustained low-level alertness that had no clean outlet. Yet the file gave the alertness a shape. Every evening, I sat down and made a new entry, added a new piece of documentation. I was converting the alertness into something useful, something that would serve me later. It was also, in a way I hadn't expected, keeping me from acting before I was ready. There's a version of this story in which a man hears his wife say another man's name in her sleep and does something impulsive, wakes her, accuses, forces a confrontation that she is better prepared for than he is. I had no interest in that version. In that version, she has the opportunity to manage his emotional response in real time, and she was very good at managing responses. I had watched her do it in other contexts for years. In that version, he also finds himself in a proceeding without documentation, without financial preparation, without any of the groundwork that the next months were quietly laying. I would not give her that version. March moved into April. I started sleeping better, which surprised me at first. I came to understand it as something simple. I had stopped lying in the dark, being uncertain. I was certain. The certainty was the worst possible kind. But resolution is its own quiet comfort, even when the resolved truth is ugly. The uncertainty had been making me sick, in a low-grade, unlocatable way, and the certainty, held privately, documented carefully, had replaced it with something more stable. Isolde and I were, on the surface, exactly as we had been. She came home at her usual time most evenings. We cooked or ordered takeout. We watched television. On some Fridays we opened wine and talked in the way that we had talked in year 2, out when everything had still felt like a discovery. I sat in those Friday evenings and watched her face and tried to understand what it was. Whether she was feeling comfort, or performing it, or guilt managing, or genuinely not thinking about what I knew. I could not tell. The inability to tell was itself a kind of answer. She was good at the surface. So was I. We had perhaps both been performing the surface for longer than either of us had admitted. There was one more thing I needed to confirm before I handed the full picture to Gideon. I had not followed her. I want to be clear about that. I had not hired anyone. I had not stationed myself outside a restaurant or a hotel. I had made a considered decision in the early weeks that surveillance felt like a position I did not want to occupy, not morally particularly, but practically. Yes, it would make me feel like someone I didn't recognize, and the version of me that could function well through this process was a version that recognized himself. I already had enough to know the truth. The photographs, the hotel receipts, the visual proof, I didn't need them. But there was one thing I wanted to see for myself. I wanted to see him in the same room as her when I was in the room too. Not to confirm the affair. I was long past needing that confirmed. But to understand the weight of it from the outside. Whether the people around them could see it. Whether I had been the only one not looking. Aldercroft Capital held a quarterly client reception. These were semi-public. Industry contacts, partners, a handful of clients. I had attended 2 of them over the years as Isolde's +1, and I was on the mailing list from those previous attendances. The invitation arrived by email. I RSVP'd yes. I told Isolde that evening that I'd thought it might be nice to go together this time. It had been a while since I'd seen her world. She processed that for half a second, a fractional delay, the kind that only reads if you're watching carefully. Then said that would be lovely. The evening of the reception, I wore a charcoal suit I hadn't had on in nearly 2 years and arrived at the venue 5 minutes before she did. I took a position near the bar, spoke to 2 people I recognized from previous events, and waited. She arrived looking composed and very slightly overdressed. Yet I recognized the overdressing as the particular kind that comes from nerves, the extra effort of someone who wants to be prepared for an environment they're not entirely comfortable in. She spotted me quickly, came to my side, and I took her hand, which I had not done in months. She let me, and her hand was cool. Conrad Ralston was already in the room. I had recognized him from the LinkedIn photograph the moment I walked in. The squareness of his jaw, the studied ease of a man used to working a room. He was near the windows with 2 other men, talking with the relaxed confidence of someone on his professional home ground. He saw Isolde before she saw him. I was watching his face when it happened. It was a half-second thing, a going still, a momentary compression of expression before the social mask reassembled itself. Comes the precise look of someone for whom the person who just entered the room is not a colleague, but something more demanding. She turned and found him, her hand tightening by a degree on my arm. The introduction was smooth. I'll give her that. Her voice didn't change register. Conrad, have you met my husband? Rowan, this is Conrad Ralston, Senior Director. She used his name without hesitation, which told me she had anticipated that this moment would come and had rehearsed for it. She had done the preparation. Conrad extended a hand. Firm grip, direct eye contact, held exactly long enough. He looked at me without flinching, which told me he had done the preparation too. Rowan, I've heard a lot about you. I held his eye and smiled. I'm sure you have, I said. What we talked for 4 minutes about nothing that mattered. A piece of infrastructure news in the financial district, a firm we both knew tangentially, the food at these events. He was smooth in a way that spoke to practice, comfortable in contradiction, at ease inside a performance he had apparently been giving for some time. I watched the specific distance he maintained from Isolde throughout. Not the natural ease of colleagues, but the slightly overmanaged distance of someone exercising deliberate restraint in a compressed space. At one point, she said something dry about the host's choice of canapés, and he laughed, a genuine laugh, not the polite kind, the kind that belongs to someone who has spent a great deal of time in the company of the person who made the joke. An intimate laugh, practiced into invisibility. I had what I came for. And I drove us home, and we talked about the event the whole way. She was more animated than she had been in weeks, the particular brightness of someone who has navigated something successfully and feels the release on the other side. She said the right things about the right people, and mentioned Conrad Ralston once more, with the specific casualness of someone dropping a name they have decided should be easily droppable. He's one of the better ones there, actually. Reliable. Follows through. He seemed like it, I said. She looked at me for a moment. I watched the road. I called Elena the next morning and asked her to trace the unidentified account number from the joint statements. What she had contacts who could run a business registration search without anything that required formal legal process. Just entity identification if a registered structure existed on the other end of the payment. She called me back 3 days later. The payment was going to a joint LLC registered 18 months ago in this state. No public-facing presence, no website, no trading activity visible externally. 2 registered members. She read me the names. Conrad Marcus Ralston. Isolde Amara Voss. I did not say anything on the phone for a long moment. The office was very quiet around me. I was aware of the quality of the air in the room. Recycled, faintly stale, the kind of air you stop noticing until you are trying to stay very still. Can you send me the registration document to the email I gave you? I said. She said she would, but I thanked her, ended the call, and sat in my chair. I looked at the middle distance for approximately 7 minutes. I did not move. An LLC. Not just an affair, a parallel financial structure. A company established jointly, with joint membership, receiving regular monthly payments from the account I contributed to. Whatever this was between them, it had progressed beyond the personal into something with a legal architecture. She had been building something with him, funding it from our shared money, quietly, for over a year. The focus anger I had been converting for 2 months arrived, briefly, as something different, sharper than focus, more specific than strategy. I let it be there for as long as it needed to be there. Then I filed it. I messaged Gideon that evening, ready to move to the next stage, and he responded within the hour. Monday morning. Bring everything. The weekend before that Monday had a particular quality. Isolde baked, which was what she did when she needed to manage something in herself. Stress, anticipation, any feeling that needed a physical outlet. The house filled with the smell of brown sugar and warming pastry. I sat in the kitchen with a book I was not really reading and occasionally said something about it, and she hummed and measured and stirred and was, for a few hours, very simply the woman I had once thought I knew entirely. I had expected this to be harder. I had thought the domesticity, the smell of her baking, the ordinary Saturday warmth of the house, all of it would sit on me like weight. But I had been grieving for 2 months by that point, out in the careful way that you grieve when you have to stay functional. The acute phase had already passed. What I felt in the kitchen that Saturday was closer to a lucid sadness. Not the sharp thing, just the recognition that something had been real and had been allowed to become something else, and that neither of those facts erased the other. She put a plate on the table beside my book without saying anything. I thanked her. I ate what was on it. I slept without difficulty. Monday morning. Gideon's office smelled like institutional carpet and printed paper. I sat across from him and drank bad coffee from a machine in the hallway while he went through the file I had brought. The printed document, Elena's LLC findings, 3 months of joint account statements, the down payment transfer records, the timeline I had assembled with dates. And he went through it with the compressed attention of someone reading for the pieces that will matter later. When he finished, he looked up. "You've been thorough," he said. "I had time." He tapped Elena's document. "The LLC changes this significantly. This is documentary evidence of a financial entanglement, a sustained, structured one, between your wife and a third party over a period of 18 months, partially funded by marital assets without your knowledge or consent. In most jurisdictions, this is no longer treated as a factor in fault-based proceedings, but it is absolutely treated as evidence of financial misconduct within the marriage. That changes the asset division calculus considerably." I asked about the house. He said, "The down payment records are the strongest piece. Peso, if you have a documented transfer from a business account you solely owned at the time of purchase, and you've told me you do, that's the foundation of an unequal contribution argument. With the LLC as additional context, her negotiating position is going to be substantially weaker than a standard 50-50 claim." He said, "Open a personal account today. Not tomorrow. Today, we begin the petition, and I want to talk about the IP valuation." The IP valuation was something I had not considered until Gideon raised it, and I was immediately grateful he had. His thinking, Thornfield Holdings was protected as a pre-marital asset, but the audit tool, the proprietary methodology I had developed in year 7, the one clients paid significant licensing fees to use, had been developed during the marriage. And her income had been part of the household during that period. If her legal team argued that marital income had indirectly funded the development of this tool, without an independent valuation predating the filing, there would be an opening to contest it. I called Pascal that afternoon. He had been my accountant at Thornfield for 9 years. One of a very small group of people in a professional capacity I trusted unconditionally. He listened to what I told him with the unhurried attention of someone who has heard most things and been shaken by very few of them. He asked 2 clarifying questions. Then, "The audit tool, When did development start? Year 6 of Thornfield, I told him. Year 2 of the marriage. Then there will be an attempt, he said. It's weak, but they'll try it if they can. You need an independent IP valuation that establishes the development history and the commercial value as they exist today, formally submitted before you file. If we have the valuation in hand first, anything she argues afterward is responding to a number we already put in the room. He was right. I had not thought of it. We arranged the valuation for the following week, conducted by a firm that specialized in technology IP. I paid the fee from the new personal account I opened that same Monday afternoon, at a bank I had never used before, with a deposit from a personal investment account, not from the joint account, not from Thornfield revenues, from a source that was unambiguously mine alone. The account number went into a new section of the file. The weeks that followed had a rhythm that was different from the weeks before. Until previously I had been observing and documenting. Now I was acting, but acting in a register that was entirely invisible from the surface. I restructured Thornfield's revenue distribution. This was not a sudden change. It was a normalized administrative adjustment, moving my portion of the monthly management fee to the new account, rather than to the joint account where it had previously landed. I did this gradually, over 2 pay cycles, following Pascal's advice on how to sequence it, so it looked like an internal restructuring rather than a sudden withdrawal. Which is exactly what it was. It just needed to look like something a managing director does routinely rather than something a man does when he is preparing to file. Clean hands. That phrase had become a kind of discipline. And I also had a quiet conversation with the estate agent I used professionally, a woman I had worked with on a commercial property matter for Thornfield a couple of years earlier, someone who had no personal connection to Isolde. I asked her to prepare a private market valuation of the property. Not a full listing, not a formal appraisal for a proceeding, just an independent written assessment of the current market value, on record. She delivered it within 10 days. The number was somewhat higher than I had expected, given what we had paid 5 years ago. The property had appreciated. The amount I stood to recover from a properly argued contribution-based division had increased accordingly. I added the valuation to the file. All of this, the accounts, the IP valuation, the estate agent assessment, plus the restructured distributions, was entirely legal. Not a single step involved money I didn't have the right to move, documentation I wasn't entitled to hold, or an action that crossed any line. That was the whole point. I had been meticulous about staying inside every right I actually had, and not reaching for anything I didn't, because the moment you overreach in this kind of situation, you hand the other side a story about you rather than a story about them. My story was going to remain very simple. I found out. I prepared carefully. I left. 2 weeks before the morning I walked out, I began moving things from the house to a storage unit I had leased on the other side of the city. I did this on mornings when Isolde was at work, a few items at a time, and in quantities that would not leave visible gaps in the house she would come home to each evening. The vinyl records first, 3 crates of them, put into cardboard boxes and carried to my car over 3 separate mornings. The books that mattered to me, the tools from the garage workshop, the second hard drive, my personal papers, passport, documents, anything that was formally mine and that I did not want to navigate retrieving later from a house where the atmosphere had changed. I left her things exactly as they were. I left the shared things exactly as they were. The house remained, to all visible evidence, the house it had always been. My clothes stayed in the wardrobe. I made the bed each morning. I cooked on my nights. I was present in every way she would notice or measure presence. I was also finishing the file. In the final 2 weeks, I went through everything one more time. the full arc of it from the first entry to the most recent, and I checked it for gaps, for anything that was interpretive rather than factual, for any moment where I had recorded something as a fact that was actually an inference. I found a few inferences. I rewrote them as observations. The file was clean when I finished. A dated record of what I had seen, supported by documentation where documentation existed. It read like something a careful person had assembled over a long time without knowing exactly what it would become, which is exactly what it was. The IP valuation came back and confirmed what Pascal had predicted. The audit tool's development history was traceable to year 6 of Thornfield's operation, with no commercially significant contribution from any source outside the business. The valuation assigned it a licensing and capital value that made it the largest single asset in the Thornfield IP portfolio. The document was dated, signed by an independent firm, and submitted to Gideon. He called me after reading it. "This closes the gap," he said. "There's nothing left for them to contest on the business." I asked about the timeline for filing. He said I had discretion. The petition was ready. The documentation was ready. I could instruct him to file and serve when I chose. I said, 2 weeks. He said he'd be ready. The night before I left, she made pasta. She cooked it in the large silver pot that had been in her family before she had moved in with me, and the steam rising in the particular way it did when she cooked pasta, and the windows were slightly cold. She put the bread on the cutting board, the good olive oil in the small ceramic dish she preferred, and we ate at the kitchen table with the low lamp on rather than the overhead light, because she had always found the overhead light too stark in the evenings. She talked about a trip. She had been thinking, she said, about the south of France. Somewhere in the hills, somewhere with dry roads and good wine, and a pace that was nothing like the pace we had been living at. She had been looking at rental properties, she said, places with terraces and views. She talked about it with the particular animation she had when she was imagining a future that included us in it, a version of us that had more room than this one, more ease. As I listened, I ate the pasta, which was good. I asked which specific area she had been looking at, because the question was natural, and she lit up in the way she lit up when she felt she was being heard, and she named a village in the Luberon with a name she mispronounced slightly, and described stone houses and lavender in the fields. "We should go somewhere this summer," she said. "We've been too static, don't you think?" "Maybe," I said. She looked at me, perhaps reading something in the non-committal answer, and I held her look pleasantly and said nothing further, and she moved on to the bread. After dinner, I washed up while she sat on the couch with her phone. The kitchen sounds were very ordinary. The water, the clink of the plates, the way the light through the window fell in a particular slant across the counter tiles, as I dried each plate and put it back where it lived. I wiped down the counter. I turned off the kitchen light. I said good night. She said it back without looking up from her phone, the way married people say good night when the evening has reached the point where it's just a formality. I went to bed at 10:30. I lay in the dark and listened to the house. The refrigerator hum, the distant sound of her program, a car going past outside. The particular quality of quiet that a house has when you already know it's no longer going to be your house, and you're lying in the last night of it, and the grief of that is present but manageable, because you've been managing it for a long time. I thought about the file, which was complete. I thought about the new account, which had enough in it. I thought about the storage unit, one which had everything I needed. I thought about the apartment across the city, which I had leased 6 weeks before under a business associate's connection, furnished sparsely with the specific things I had shipped there in advance. I thought about the envelope on the kitchen table in the morning. I fell asleep. The alarm on my wrist went off at 4:30 a.m. A low vibration, set 3 days before, calibrated to wake me without waking her. I was already almost awake. I lay still for a moment and listened, her breathing slow and even. The house. Then I moved. I dressed in the dark from the bag I had packed 2 nights earlier and stored in my study. Dark trousers, a sweater, my good coat. I did not open the wardrobe. I did not turn on a light. And I moved through the bedroom the way I had moved through it in the dark 100 times before. Around the edge of the bed, through the gap between the wardrobe and the door, out into the hall. I picked up the bag from the study. I went downstairs. In the kitchen, I placed the envelope on the table beside her coffee mug. This was the piece I had thought about most carefully in the weeks leading to this morning. Some people leave letters. Some people wake the other person and insist on a real-time confrontation. I understood the appeal of both, the desire to be heard, the desire to watch it land. I had no need for either. The envelope contained 2 documents. The first was a formal notice from Gideon's office, one he had prepared specifically for this moment at my instruction. Notification of forthcoming dissolution proceedings. Was service of formal papers to follow within 5 working days. Not my words, the mechanism's words. The second was a single printed page, Elena's LLC summary, with the registration document beneath it. Both names on the joint membership clearly visible. Conrad Marcus Ralston, Isolde Amara Voss. Not an accusation. Documentation. Evidence that I had not left in confusion, or in haste, or in the blindness of a man who didn't know what was happening in his own house. Evidence that I had known for a long time, that I had known with precision. I set the envelope where she would find it when she came down. I picked up the bag. I walked out of the kitchen, through the hall, to the front door. I opened it quietly. The specific cold of 4:47 a.m. settled around me immediately, sharp and damp, the smell of early spring and wet pavement, ere the sky a dark, bruised blue that was just beginning, at the very edge of the east, to think about lightning. The street was entirely empty. My car was 2 blocks away, where I had moved it the previous evening, parked outside a building that was not ours. I pulled the door closed behind me. I walked the 2 blocks. My footsteps were the only sound. The cold was clean, the way cold is clean when everything else is still. I unlocked the car and put the bag in the back. Sat in the driver's seat. Did not start the engine. The house was not visible from where I was parked. I did not go back to look at it. I started the engine at 4:51 a.m. Gideon filed the petition at 9 that morning. By then I was already 4 hours away. Bosham? In an apartment that smelled like fresh paint and the faint synthetic smell of new furniture I had not yet lived in long enough to stop noticing. East-facing window, a thin April light coming through the glass and lying flat across a clean floor. I put down the bag. I stood at the window. The city below was doing what it did at 9 in the morning on a weekday. Traffic, pedestrians, the ordinary machinery of a day. My phone rang at 8:47 a.m. The screen showed her name. I watched it ring. It rang 3 more times over the next 20 minutes. Then a different number, likely him or someone advising her, or a first impulse toward a solicitor she had not yet retained. I let it go to voicemail. At 9:30, Gideon sent a single message. Filed. He would be in touch. I made espresso. The machine was good. I had done the research and had it shipped to the apartment 2 weeks before, and the grind was right, and it came out clean and dense the way it should. I stood at the window with the espresso and looked at the light on the floor. The calls continued through the morning. Isolde, 3 more times. Then not at all, which told me she had read the envelope and spoken to someone who told her to stop calling. That transition, from multiple calls to silence, had a specific information content. It meant she now understood that this was not a dramatic gesture that could be reversed with a phone conversation. It was a process. The process was already running. In the months that followed, I did not track the proceedings with anxiety. Gideon handled it and kept me informed at the relevant steps. There was something clarifying about having converted 2 months of private preparation into a formal legal mechanism. The clarity of knowing that every piece of documentation I had assembled over that time was now doing its work inside a process designed exactly for it. The LLC was the cornerstone. When Isolde's solicitor reviewed the financial discovery, and they did, within weeks of being retained, they found it there, unambiguous. A registered entity, 2 members, 18 months of operation, funded in part from the joint account. There was no framing that made it something other than what it was. A financial structure she had built with the man whose name she had said in her sleep. Pascal's IP valuation closed the Thornfield question before it was fully opened. Her solicitor made a preliminary inquiry about the audit tool in the first round of financial disclosure requests. Gideon submitted the valuation. The inquiry went quiet. The house was sold 4 months after the filing. The argument for unequal contribution, the down payment records, the documented transfer from the Thornfield business account, resulted in a negotiated split that reflected the original 2/3, 1/3 division more closely than any standard formula. Isolde's solicitor contested it for 2 weeks before the LLC's presence in the proceedings made the negotiating position too costly to maintain. She had, as Gideon had predicted, less moral ground to press hard from when her own financial activities during the marriage were fully visible in the disclosure documents. She received what the documentation supported, not more. The personal investment accounts were divided under the standard rules. I had planned for this. It was a concession I had pre-accepted and set aside from everything else. Not contested, just resolved. The joint account funds were distributed, with the $12,000 traceable to the marital account, the sum that had been diverted to the LLC, deducted from Isolde's portion. The LLC itself came to very little. Some nominal investments, $12,000 in deposits, no significant growth. Whatever she and Conrad Ralston had imagined building together, it had not yet become the thing they imagined. Whether it would or wouldn't was no longer anything to do with me. I did not think about him. I found, repeatedly when I tried to locate any feeling about Conrad Ralston specifically, that I had very little. So he had made choices. She had made a marriage. The marriage was the thing that had been real and the thing that had been slowly unmade, and he was only relevant as evidence of the unmaking. Without the unmaking, he was no one to me. With it, he was still not particularly interesting. The apartment became my home in the gradual, unsentimental way that apartments become homes. One decent lamp, a rug with enough color to make the floor bearable in winter, the right kitchen equipment finally selected and owned rather than inherited from another person's taste. I cooked dinner for myself most evenings, and found that I was apparently quite good at it when I was cooking only for someone who knew exactly what he wanted. I ran through the city in the mornings, when the light was still low and the streets were quiet. And and I found that the particular quality of silence in a city at 6 a.m. was something I had been missing without knowing I was missing it. I worked on Thornfield with a focus that surprised me, given everything. The audit tool had a new client base I had been cultivating for 2 years that was now beginning to convert, and the revenue trajectory for the year was better than it had been in 3. Pascal watched the numbers with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had always thought the business was worth more than the distraction of the years had allowed it to show. I did not date. The wanting would return in its own time. I was in no hurry. 6 months after the morning I had walked out into the cold and the bruised pre-dawn sky, I sat at the desk in the east-facing room of the apartment with a coffee beside me, reading through a Thornfield proposal for a new client engagement, the IP valuation work, the specific mechanism of a business that had been cleanly separated from a marriage and was now demonstrably, documentably its own thing. The light came through the window the same way it had on the first morning. Thin, even, unremarkable. My phone was face up on the desk. I had stopped putting it face down at some point in the months since I'd left. I didn't remember making the decision. I just noticed one afternoon that I wasn't doing it anymore. The proposal needed one more page. I found the gap on page 3, rewrote the paragraph that was carrying too much freight in too few sentences, and then printed the whole thing and put it in the folder I was taking to the 10 o'clock meeting. The meeting was at a firm called Meridian, was in a building downtown that smelled like recycled air and someone else's cologne. I put on my coat. I picked up the folder. I left for the meeting.
I was watching Possess's VOD from, or the stream from this morning. His wife's name is hilarious, and then I just looked down and saw the chat. Safe space for Australians. I thought you weren't an Aussie. You just live in Australia. Right? Oh my god. I have shamed myself. Where was it? Tasmania?